There is a country where seeming natural different does mean for $4 trillion. Under its soil sits more cobalt than anywhere else on Earth. Copper richer than almost any mine in the world. Coltan. The metal inside almost every phone on Earth. By every geological measure, this should be one of the wealthiest nations that has ever existed, Instead, most of its people live on less than $2 a day. This is the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And what happened to it is not an accident. It was built, deliberately, over 140 years. This is how. 54 nations. The stories Africa was never told. This is Episode 1. In 1885, at a conference table in Berlin, European powers divided Africa between themselves. No African was present. One man walked away with something no one else got. Not a colony for his country, a colony for himself. King Leopold II of Belgium was handed personal ownership of a territory the size of Western Europe, over 2.5 million square kilometers, 85 times the size of Belgium itself. He called it the Congo Free State. He told the world it was a humanitarian mission. It was a business. Leopold never set foot in the Congo, not once. He ran it from Brussels through agents and a private army called the Force Publique. First, they took ivory. Then, in the 1890s, the world invented the rubber tire, and the Congo was covered in wild rubber vines. Every village was given a quota, failed to meet it, and the punishments were designed to terrorize. Villages burned, families taken, hands severed. Soldiers were ordered to account for every bullet they fired. The proof required was a human hand. So when a round was wasted, a hand was cut off anyway to balance the ledger. Baskets of hands became a form of historians estimate that between 8 and 10 million Congolese died in those 23 years, roughly half the population. In 1908, after international pressure, Belgium took the territory from its own king. But the machine Leopold built did not stop. It just changed owners. On the 30th of June 1960, the Congo became independent. Its first elected prime minister was 34 years old. His name was Patrice Lumumba. At the independence ceremony, the King of Belgium gave a speech praising Belgian rule as a gift of civilization. Lumumba was not scheduled to reply. He replied anyway. He stood up and described what the Congolese had actually lived through: the forced labor, the mockery, the land taken. He said independence had not been given, it had been won. It was one of the great speeches of the 20th century. It was also, effectively, a death sentence. Within weeks, the country was pulled apart. The mineral-rich province of Katanga declared its own independence, backed by Belgian troops and mining interests. The army mutinied. Lumumba asked the United Nations for help. He got very little, so he asked the Soviet Union. That single request turned the Congo into a Cold War battlefield. He was removed from office after 67 days in power. He was arrested, flown to Katanga, and killed in January 1961. Belgian officers were present. Declassified documents later confirmed both Belgian and American involvement in the plot against him. The Congo's first democratic government lasted just over 2 months. Into that vacuum stepped an army officer the West could work with. His name was Joseph Désiré Mobutu. He seized power in 1965 and held it for 32 years. Mobutu renamed the country Zaire. He renamed himself. He built a personality cult. His face on the money, his image before the evening news, his own name replacing colonial ones across the map. And he perfected something Leopold had started, a state that exists to extract. Mobutu treated the national treasury as a personal account. Estimates of what he took range into the billions of dollars, while roads decayed, hospitals emptied, and civil servants went years without pay. The West kept funding him anyway. He was anti-communist, and the Congo sat on uranium, copper, and cobalt. For 3 decades, that was enough. Then in 1989, the Cold War ended, and Mobutu's usefulness ended with it. Support dried up, the currency collapsed. Soldiers who hadn't been paid looted the capital. He was overthrown in 1997 and died in exile months later. He left behind a country the size of Western Europe with almost no functioning roads connecting it. What came next has a name almost no one outside Africa recognizes: the Great War of Africa. 9 African countries and dozens of armed groups fought across Congolese territory. Estimates of the death toll, mostly from disease and starvation rather than combat, run into the millions. It is widely described as the deadliest conflict since the Second World War. And in the East, the fighting never truly stopped. Armed groups still control mining areas today. The pattern is brutally simple. Whoever holds the mine holds the money, and the money buys the guns that hold the mine. Here is where this story stops being history and becomes your problem too. The DRC produces roughly 70% of the world's cobalt. It holds more than half of the world's known reserves. In 2024, it mined around 220,000 tons, about 8 times the next largest producer, Indonesia. Cobalt is in electric vehicle batteries, in laptops, in phones, in data centers running artificial intelligence. Between 500,000 and 2 million Congolese work in artisanal mining, informal, largely unregulated, frequently dangerous, and in documented cases involving children. Mining makes up roughly 90% of the country's export earnings. And yet the majority of Congolese remain among the poorest people on the planet. The wealth leaves. It always has. But there is a shift happening that almost no one predicted. In 2025, Kinshasa did something extraordinary. It stopped exporting cobalt altogether for 8 months and then reopened the tap with quotas attached. For the first time in 140 years, the Congo tried to set the price of its own resources instead of accepting whatever it was offered. It is the most ambitious assertion of mineral sovereignty Africa has seen in decades. Whether it holds against Beijing, against Washington, against the mining companies, is genuinely unknown. But it changes the question. For 14 decades, the Congo's story has been told as something done to it. Berlin, Brussels, Washington, Moscow, Beijing. The next chapter might, finally, be one it writes itself. 90% of the Congo's export income comes out of the ground, and only about 30% of that ground has ever been properly surveyed. Whatever this country becomes, the world will not be able to ignore it. It is already in your pocket. Next episode, Nigeria. A country with more people than any other in Africa, more oil than almost anywhere on the continent, and an economy that keeps refusing to take off. 54 nations. The stories Africa was never told. One at a time.